Welcome to Shahnameh, the Book of Kings. Today we continue with the story of Feraydun and his 3 sons, and we begin with the youngest son, Iraj. Here is his story. Then Feraydun brought into the open a plan he had kept secret. He divided the world into 3 parts. One part consisted of the West, another of China and the land of the Turks, and the third of Persia, the land of warriors. The first area he gave to Salm, whom he ordered to select an army and set off to the west, where he was enthroned and acclaimed as the lord of the western lands. He made Tur the master of Turan and gave him sovereignty over the Turks and the lands of China. Tur selected his army and marched to his new home, where he was enthroned, and his nobles showered him with jewels and acknowledged him as the lord of Turan. When the affairs of these 2 had been settled, Feraydun turned to Iraj, on whom he bestowed Persia and the land of the Arabs. He gave him the crown and sword, the seal and ivory throne, because he was worthy of them. Each of the 3 princely brothers sat in state in his own kingdom, and wise men proclaimed Iraj as the lord of Persia. Time passed, and fate kept its secrets hidden. Feraydun grew old, and dust covered the garden of spring. Strength lessened as age creeps on, and as Feraydun's days darkened, so his sons grew stronger. Salm's heart leaped up in his breast, and his moods and manners changed. His spirit was overwhelmed by greed and desire, and he plotted with his counselors. He was dissatisfied with the portion his father had allotted him, and with the fact that the golden throne of Persia had been given to the youngest brother. His heart seething with fury, and his face filled with frowns, he sent a messenger to his brother, the king of China. The message wished him long life and happiness, and went on, "Look well at our story, the like of which no one has ever heard. We were 3 brothers, all worthy of the throne, and the youngest of us has been blessed by good fortune. As I am the oldest and the most experienced, fate should have favored me, and I am left aside. Shouldn't the throne and the crown belong to you, my lord? He gave Persia, the land of heroes, and Yemen to Iraj, the western lands to me, and the Turks and China to you. The youngest of us is the lord of Persia, and there is no sense in this. There is no wisdom in our father's plan. We too should grieve at his decision, which has done us a great wrong." The envoy quickly made his way to the court of Turan, where he suavely repeated all he had heard and filled the king's head with vain thoughts. When brave Tur heard these words, he leaped up like a raging lion and said, "Tell your master this. Remember, my just lord, that our father deceived us in our youth, that he planted a tree whose sap is blood and whose fruits are poisonous. We must not hesitate to act. It would be foolish to delay." The envoy brought back this message, and once the secret was out between them, the 2 brothers, one from China and the other from the West, met together and mingled poison with their honey, discussing how they should act. They chose a priest, an active, eloquent, perceptive man who would remember whatever he was entrusted with. Salm spoke first, washing his eyes of all shame before his father. "Let neither wind nor swirling dust delay your journey as you hasten on your way. When you arrive at court, see that you tell King Feraydun his 2 sons wish him well, and then remind him of his age, that he should fear God here and for eternity. A young man hopes for future joys, but men whose hair is white will not see youth again. Tell him, God gave you all the earth to rule, but you have acted like an evil fool. You had 3 sons, all valiant and brave. You favored one of them to give, and him you gave the crown of sovereignty. The other 2 were disregarded and despised by you. We are not less than him by birth. If we deserve the imperial days, so do we, and God will never look with favor on your preferential treatment of his son. snatch the crane off his worthless head and give him some dark corner of the earth to live. If you do not, we'll bring armed warrior bands from China, Turkestan, and Western worlds to turn Iraj's day to dusty night and humble Persia with our army's might." When the priest heard these harsh messages, he kissed the ground and set off as quickly as wind-borne fire. He reached Feraydun's castle, which towered above him like a mountain, its battlements hidden among the clouds. Courtiers sat in the throne room, and beyond a curtain were the nobility. On one side lions and leopards were tethered, and on the other raging war elephants. The assembled warriors gave a roar like lions. It seemed to the messenger as though this were a celestial court, and that the warriors standing there were angelic beings. Feraydun was told of the envoy's arrival, and had the curtain drawn back so that his horse could enter. The envoy saw that Feraydun's face filled all eyes and hearts, and that he was like a cypress in stature, that his visage was like the sun's, and that his hair was like white camphor about a red nose. His lips were all smiles, his gaze was modest and welcoming. Kingly words adorned his lips. The envoy prostrated himself and covered the ground with kisses. Feraydun motioned him to rise and sat him on a worthy seat. First he asked about his son's health and welfare, then inquired solicitously as to the long, hard road the messenger had traveled. The envoy answered, "Great king, may the throne never be without you. Those you ask about live for your well-being, but I am merely a slave and not master of my own body. I have brought a harsh, angry message to the king, although I am guiltless of its contents. Tell me, my lord, if you would hear the young men's foolish words." Feraydun ordered him to speak, and he repeated the words he had heard. As Feraydun listened, his mind seethed in anger, and he said, "You are a wise man, and there is no need for you to apologize for what you have said. My own eyes have foreseen this, and my heart suspected it. Tell those two corrupt and worthless fools, those two whose brains have led astray by Ahriman, the king is pleased that you have shown your natures and sees your greetings are worthy of you. You have forgotten the advice I gave you, and no trace of wisdom remains in your minds. Have you no fear or shame before God? Once my hair was as black as pitch, my stature was like the cypress, and my face shone like full moon. But the skies turn and have bent my back. They will bend yours too, and what is bent becomes unstable. I swear in God's name, by the earth, the sun, the moon, the crown, and throne, what I have done to you was just. I summoned men who are wise, who know the stars and understand the skies. I spent long days in weighing up your worth, apportioning the countries of the earth. The fear of God was in me, and I sought for justice on the earth and in court. I'll give the world to my 3 sons, I said. But Ahriman has filled your heart and head, and ask yourselves now, will God look kindly on the plans you've made, the evil things you've done? Listen, this story's one you ought to know. You'll reap the consequences of what you sow. The fleeting world is not the world where we are destined to abide eternally, and for the sake of an unworthy throne, you let the devil claim you for his own. I've few days left. I've no heart for war. I cannot strive and struggle any more. But hear an old man's words. The heart that's freed from gnawing passion and ambitious greed looks on king's treasures and the dust as one. The man who sells his brother as you've done for this same worthless dust will never be regarded as a child of purity. The world has seen so many men like you and laid them low. There's nothing you can do but turn to God. Take thought then for the way you travel, since it leads to Judgment Day." The envoy heard his words, kissed the ground, and turned away, leaving Feraydun's court as quickly as the wind. When Salm's messenger had gone, Feraydun called Iraj to him and told him what had happened. He said, "My 2 warlike sons are attacking from the west. Their stars have foretold their joy and evil, and the countries they were allotted are barren. Your brother will not be a brother to you while you wear the crown. From the ends of the earth, my 2 sons have declared open war. If you are ready to fight, open your treasuries and equip your men. Grasp this cup while it is still dawn, or at night supper will be at your expense. Look for no allies in this world. Righteousness and innocence are your only friends. The noble Iraj gazed at his reverend father and said, Our lives pass from us like the wind, and why should wise men grieve to know that they must die? The Judas blossom fades. The lovely face of light is dimmed, and darkness takes its place. The world is pleasure first, then grief, and then we leave this fleeting world of living men. Our beds are dust for all eternity. Why should we plant the tree we'll never see? The starry heavens turn and turn again, and all they bring mankind in blood and pain. The earth has seen so many men who wore king's robes and crowns, and will see many more. Vengeance has never been the royal way, and I shall not do evil, come what may. What are the crowns enthroned to me? Unarmed, I'll greet my brothers, whom I've never harmed, and I'll tell them to forget their enmity. Remember Jamshid, I shall say, how he was driven from this world he'd ruled alone, bereft of all his sovereignty and throne? My brothers will endure this fate. We, too, will taste the destiny that Jamshid knew. I'll speak to them in kindness. This will be better than angry words and enmity. Feraydun replied, My wise son, your brothers look for war, while you look for reconciliation. I am reminded of the saying that one should not be surprised if the moon radiates moonlight. Your answer is noble, and your heart is filled with love. But what will happen to a man who knowingly places his head in the dragon's maw? Surely poison will destroy him, since this is the dragon's nature. My son, if this is your decision, prepare yourself and choose a few companions from your troops to accompany you. In my heart's agony, I will write a letter to these brothers of yours, in the hopes that I shall greet you once more with your body unharmed, since my soul's joy is in seeing you. The king wrote letters to the Lord of the West and the king of China. He began with praises of eternal God and continued, This letter is to advise 2 sons who shine in the heavens, 2 lords of war, 2 jewels among kings, and it is from one who has experienced the world, who has uncovered its secrets and turned night to day, who has wielded mace and sword and overcome all manner of difficulties. I no longer wish to wear the crown, to amass treasures, or to occupy the throne. I have suffered enough, and desire only the well-being of my 3 sons. Your brother with whom you are vexed, even though he has never breathed a word against you. He prefers you to his sovereignty, and acts nobly. He has left his throne and rides to you now, humbly as your younger brother. Respect him, and treat him well, and when he has been with you a few days, return him to me safe and sound. The king's seal was placed on the letter, and Iraj rode out from the palace. He went with a few companions, both young and old, the minimum necessary to accompany him on a journey, and as he drew near his brothers, he had no notion of their dark plans. They went out to welcome him as usual and paraded their troops before him. When he saw their apparent kindness, Iraj's face relaxed. 2 of them were filled with hatred, one with benevolence, and they questioned one another. The conversation was to no one's satisfaction. 2 men whose hearts were filled with longing for vengeance, one whose heart was at peace, made their way to the commander's camp. The army's eyes were fixed on Iraj, and the troops saw that he was worthy of the throne and the crown. Their hearts were stirred by the sight of the young prince, and they turned to one another, praising him, saying, Iraj deserves to be an emperor, and that no one but he should reign. Saw this from the sidelines and was troubled by the soldier's behavior. He rode with his heart filled with rancor. Blood suffused his liver, and his face was knotted in frowns. He cleared his pavilion of strangers and sought in consult with Tur. They talked about every aspect of the affair, about sovereignty, and who reigned over which lands. In the midst of their conversation, Salm said to Tur, "Why are our men huddled in pairs? As we returned here, they were different from when we went out to welcome Iraj. The whole way back, they all had their eyes fixed on him. My heart is darkened by this business of Persia, and the more I consider it, the more my heart aches at it. I watch the men of our two armies, and they won't call anyone but him king from now on. If you don't uproot this upstart now, he'll drag you down from your throne." They came to their decision, and throughout the night talked about how to accomplish it. When the veil was drawn back from the sun and dawn broke, dispelling sleep, their two worthless hearts were set on this, and they washed all shame from their eyes. They strode from the pavilion toward Iraj's tent. When he saw them approaching, kindness suffused his heart, and he ran to greet them. The three brothers entered Iraj's tent, and the conversation ranged back and forth. Tur said, "If you are younger than us, why were you given the most important crown? You get Persia, you get its wealth, and candid throne and crown, while I have to make do with ruling Turks, and my younger brother has to suffer in the West. Our father favored you, the youngest son, when he made this division, but I will not allow this. Neither the crown, nor its throne, nor sovereignty, nor Persia can be yours." When Iraj heard Tur's word, he answered him simply and straightforwardly, "You are my older brother, and ambitious for glory. If you would be happy, you must calm yourself. I don't want Persia, or the West, or China, or sovereignty, or authority over any country. Greatness that brings evil in its train is something for which we should weep. And if the heavens raise your saddle up to glory, finally your pillow will be the dust. I sat on the throne of Persia, it's true, but now I am tired of both the crown and the throne. I hand them both over to you, and may you harbor no hatred for me from now on. I've no desire to quarrel with you, and your heart should not be upset by anything I do. If it troubles you, and it means I cannot see you, I have no wish to rule the world. I don't want anything except to be subject, and may greed and the longing for your grandeur never sway my heart." But Tur, who lacked all sense of righteousness, was annoyed by his brother's words and frowned at them. He leapt up and grasped the golden throne on which he had been seating and brought it crashing down on Iraj's head. Iraj begged him to spare his life and said, "Have you no fear of God, no shame before our father? Is this your decision? Don't kill me, because my blood will be on your head. You have a soul yourself. How can you say that you will take another's soul away? Pity the ants that toil beneath your feet. They have their souls. To them their souls are sweet. Don't make yourself a murderer. You'll never see me again. I will be content with the corner of the world, there to earn my bread in sorrow. How can you long to spill your brother's blood and torment our father's heart with such a crime? You want the world, and now you can have it. Don't spill my blood, turning against God in this way." Tur heard his words, but made no answer. He drew a dagger from his boot and split Iraj from head to foot to that his body was veiled with blood. He plunged the poisoned dagger into his brother's trunk. Iraj's body buckled. The noble cypress was felled, and the blossoms of his face ran with blood. This is how the young prince died. O world, you nurtured him, but offered no protection when his brother laid him low. I don't know whom you favored secretly, but we should weep for all we hear and see. And you, who murdered kings, who live in fear, learn from these criminals whose tale you hear. Tur severed the mammoth warrior's head, and had it filled with camphor and musk, and sent it with this messenger to their aged father, who had divided the world between them. Here is the head of your darling, to whom you gave our ancestors' crown. Give him the crown now, and the throne if you wish. But this branch of the royal tree is no more." Then the two unjust brothers returned to their kingdoms, one in China and one in the west. Feraydun watched the road, and the army watched with him, anxious for the return of the young king. When it was time for him to appear, his father prepared a turquoise throne for him, and a jewel-studded crown. Wine and musicians were made ready, war drums were strapped on elephants, and the whole town was decorated. As Feraydun and his armies busied themselves with their preparations, a cloud of dust rose above the road. From it emerged a camel on which sat a grieving, wailing messenger, and strapped to the animal's side was a coffin. This man rode up to Feraydun, sighing, weeping, and ashen-faced. Appalled by his words and manner, the king's companions removed the coffin lid and drew back the coverlet of silk within it to reveal the severed head of Iraj. Feraydun fell from his horse into the dust, and the soldiers with him rent their clothes in grief. Their faces were blackened, their eyes rolled back in despair, and only the whites were visible. The princes returned in such a manner through the welcoming party into disarray. The banners were torn, the drums turned upside down, and nobles' faces became the color of ebony. The elephants and drums were draped in black cloth, the Arab horses in deep blue. The king walked, as did his soldiers, heaping dust on their head. The nobles cried out in an agony and sorrow, clawing at their flesh as they mourned for the prince. Broken-hearted, their king wailing in grief, the army made its way to the garden of Iraj. Here the young prince had held court and presided over festivities. Clasping his young son's head to his breast, Feraydun entered the garden weeping. He looked at the imperial throne and at his son's head, which would never wear the crown again. At the garden's royal pool, the blossoming trees, the willows, and the quince trees, he saw the place of celebrations and ceremony emptied of its nobility, and a cloud of dust rising up to the heavens. He burned the garden and clawed at his cheeks, wept and tore his hair. His waist was girdled with blood, and he spread fire through the pleasure grounds, uprooted the flower beds, gave the cypresses to the flames, and with this act sealed tight the eyes of happiness. He cradled Iraj's head in his arms and turned his face towards God. He said, "Lord of justice, look at the slaughtered innocent, his head severed by a dagger, his body devoured by lions. Burn the hearts of his two unjust brothers, and may they see nothing but sorrow in their lives. Burn their vitals, and have them suffer such agony that the wild beasts will pity their pain. I ask only that I be given a little time, my lord, until I see a child from Iraj's seed, who will bind on his belt for vengeance. When I have seen this, it is right that I lie where the earth will be the measure of me." He wept so long in this manner, and the grass grew up to his chest. The earth was his bed, and the dirt was his pillow, and the bright world was dimmed before him. The doors to the court were closed, and Feraydun loosed his tongue, saying, "My young prince, my noble warrior, no one who wore the crown has died as you have died. Your head severed by Aramon, your bodies shroud the lion's maw. The beasts mourn for you and find no rest or sleep. All the country's men and women have gathered together and sit weeping, their eyes wet with tears. They sit grieving for their king's death. What a day is this for them, in which they see all life as death." Time passed, and in Iraj's harem, Feraydun saw that one of his women, named Farid, whom Iraj had greatly loved, was pregnant. The king was happy to see her secret, hoping that her child would be a means to vengeance for his son's death. When the time for her delivery came, she gave birth to a girl who brought up in comfort and with tenderness. As you surveyed this lovely girl from head to foot, you would say she was Iraj himself. When she had grown and the time came for her to marry, her face was as lovely as canopus, and her hair as black as pitch. Her grandfather promised her to Pashang and married her to him after an appropriate time had passed. And now I finish my telling of this tale for today, but I'll be back with more tomorrow.